When I walk through the front gates of the university these days, I do it with a calm sense of authority. Students nod politely, some smile, some wave. A few even stop me to ask a quick question about the upcoming assignment or a lecture I gave last week. But none of them know, or at least very few, that just a few years ago I was one of them. And not just any student, but the student who got expelled in the middle of second year. Yeah, expelled. Let me take you back to that time. I was 19, loud, confident, and, in retrospect, full of myself. I thought I was smarter than my professors, too clever for the rules, and way too ambitious to play by the university standards. I skipped classes. I challenged my lecturers in ways that were more disrespectful than critical. And worst of all, I thought getting high grades without trying was a kind of protest against the system. But the system didn't care. I still remember the day I got the email. It was short. Too short, actually. Dear my name, due to repeated violations of academic policy and failure to meet academic standards, we regret to inform you that your enrollment at university name has been terminated, effective immediately. I stared at the screen for what felt like an hour. My ears buzzed. My hands shook. I had to reread it 3 times before it hit me. I'd really done it. I'd pushed too far. I couldn't tell my parents. Eventually I had to, but not right away. At first I lied. Said I was taking a semester off to focus on personal projects. Whatever that means. Truth was I was lost. For a while, I floated. I worked odd jobs, waited tables, stocked shelves at a supermarket, even tried to run a blog about philosophy and education, but it flopped after 2 months. But somewhere in that blur of failure and soul-searching, I started reading again. Really reading. I picked up the books I'd ignored in university. I went through Plato, Kierkegaard, even Kant. I watched hours of lectures online. And slowly, painfully, I began to realize something. I hadn't hated education. I'd hated being taught badly. And that's when everything changed. I started tutoring high school students in philosophy and literature. At first, it was just to earn some money. But I saw their eyes light up when I explained a complex idea using a meme or a personal story. I watched them fall in love with learning the way I never had when I was a student. And I thought, what if teaching could be different? 3 years passed. I reapplied to university. Not the same one, of course. Another one. I got in. I took it seriously this time. I didn't try to be the smartest person in the room. I tried to be the one who listened the hardest. For years after I'd been expelled, I graduated with honors. I still remember walking across the stage in that gown, thinking, if only they knew where I came from. But the best part? One of my professors from my original university was there, attending the ceremony as a guest speaker. He spotted me. He smiled. And after the ceremony, he came up to me and said, I heard you've changed. I nodded. Trying to. He said, we're hiring adjunct lecturers next semester. You should apply. I blinked. Thought it was a joke. It wasn't. That was 2 years ago. Now, I teach Introduction to Critical Thinking at the same university that once kicked me out for, ironically, refusing to think critically within the boundaries they expected. It's funny how life works. Walking into the lecture hall for the first time as a lecturer was surreal. The same old wooden doors. The same echo when you walked in late. The same chipped paint on the ceiling. I half expected a younger version of me to be slouched in the back row, headphones in, pretending not to care. But now the lights were brighter, the silence heavier. 40 students sat in front of me, waiting for someone to tell them something worth remembering. I took a breath, looked at them, and said, let's get one thing straight. I don't care how many degrees I have. I'm not here to lecture you into boredom. I'm here to help you think. A few students raised their eyebrows. One smirked. Another scribbled something down. I told them the truth on day 1. I said, I used to be one of you. Not metaphorically. Literally. I studied here. I failed here. I got kicked out. And now I'm back to make sure you don't repeat my mistakes. That got their attention. From then on, I taught in a way that reflected the lessons life had smacked into me. No pomp, no ego. Just clarity, curiosity, and honesty. Instead of starting with abstract definitions, I asked them questions. Real ones. What makes a person good? Is it their actions or their intentions? Why do we obey rules? And what happens when we don't? Can you prove that reality isn't just a dream? The discussions that follow were messy, chaotic, and full of energy. I encouraged disagreement, even absurdity. My rule was, you can say almost anything as long as you can explain why. By mid-semester, something shifted. Students weren't just attending. They were engaging. They stayed after class to argue about Nietzsche, emailed me at 2 a.m. with half-baked theories about free will, quoted podcasts, movies, even memes to support their points. And every time they lit up with an idea, truly got it, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt redemption. Still, not everyone was thrilled about my presence. Some faculty members didn't hide their skepticism. "He's unorthodox," I heard one of them say during a meeting, "a little too informal with students." Another said, "Are we sure he belongs here? He has a history." They weren't wrong. I did have a history, but I also had a future, and now a classroom full of students who believed learning could be human again. There was one professor in particular, Dr. Halvorsen, who made it clear he didn't like me. He was old school, tweed jacket, dry lectures, and zero tolerance for disruption. He'd been there when I was expelled. In fact, he had signed the final recommendation for my dismissal. So imagine his face when we shared staff room. One afternoon, after a tense departmental meeting, I found myself alone with him. He was sipping black coffee, scrolling through printed notes, and avoiding eye contact. I nodded. "Hello, Professor." He glanced up. "Lecture," he corrected. I smiled, still working on the title. A long pause. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You're doing well." I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." Students talk. They like your classes. Even the ones who don't like philosophy seem to show up for yours. I waited for the but. It didn't come. Instead, he added, "Don't let that go to your head. Popularity is not the same as rigor." I nodded. Understood. And just like that, the air between us thawed slightly. Now, it's been almost 3 years. I've designed new courses, mentored students through mental health struggles, helped one of them publish an essay in a respected journal, watched another get accepted into a master's program abroad. Every semester, I start my first lecture with the same confession. I was expelled from this university. Some students laugh. Some look confused. A few glance around as if waiting for the punchline. But I follow it with, "And now I stand here to prove that failure isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of your real education." It was a Thursday afternoon when I met Mia. She showed up in my office with a notebook, an oversized hoodie, and eyes that carried a mix of skepticism and exhaustion. She didn't sit down at first, just stood at the door and said, "Hi, I think I'm failing." I gestured to the chair across from me. "Let's talk about it." She dropped her bag, slumped into the chair, and sighed dramatically. "I don't get any of this. Your lectures make sense when you talk, but when I try to write it down, I feel stupid." I didn't flinch. I'd heard this before, from others and from myself, years ago. "You're not stupid," I said. "You're probably overthinking it. What are you struggling with?" She pulled out a draft essay, already bleeding red ink from another professor's notes. The topic was basic. What is truth? But her ideas were scattered, her writing nervous and apologetic. I don't know what the right answer is," she mumbled. I leaned forward. "There isn't one." That caught her attention. The point of philosophy isn't to find the right answer. It's to ask better questions. And to learn how to follow your thoughts to the end, even if they lead somewhere uncomfortable. She looked at me for a moment, trying to decide if I was messing with her. Then, slowly, she cracked a small smile. Over the next few weeks, she started showing up more often, after class, during office hours, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with half-finished ideas. She asked big questions and wasn't afraid to sound unsure. At the end of the semester, she handed in an essay titled, "The Beauty of Uncertainty." It wasn't perfect, but it was bold. It had a voice. She passed with distinction. One afternoon, she lingered after our final class. Most students had already left for winter break. "You know," she said, "I almost dropped out." I nodded. "I get that. Your class kind of saved me. Not in a dramatic way, but you made learning feel human again." That hit me harder than I expected. "Thanks," I said. "I used to need saving too." She raised an eyebrow. "Wait, You're the one who got expelled, right? I laughed. Guilty. She grinned. Guess you turned out okay. That same winter, I got an email from the dean. It was brief, the way important things usually are. Subject: promotion consideration, faculty vote required. They were considering moving me to a full-time senior lecturer position. I sat there, rereading the email again and again. 5 years ago, I was a dropout. Now, I was being offered permanence, respect, a future. The vote wasn't guaranteed, though. It had to pass the faculty board. At the meeting, some familiar faces looked at me through narrowed eyes. Others nodded politely. I delivered my teaching philosophy, outlined my student engagement metrics, shared testimonials, and explained how I integrated classical philosophy with modern media and lived experience. One professor, not Halvorsen, but someone even more traditional, raised a hand. Isn't your teaching style a bit unconventional? I smiled. It is, but I believe the classroom should be a place of intellectual risk, of honest conversation, of relevance. We're not just preparing students for exams. We're preparing them for life. The room was quiet. The next day, I got the vote. Unanimous. By now, I've become a kind of legend on campus, the guy who got kicked out and came back to teach. Some students think it's just a rumor. Others ask me about it directly. I always tell the truth. Failure taught me more than success ever could. It gave me empathy. It stripped away arrogance. It taught me that education is a privilege, not a burden, and that the real work doesn't start until you stop pretending you know everything. One day, I returned to the same hall where I'd once received the expulsion notice. The administration office looked the same. Same gray walls. Same dusty certificates. I asked the receptionist if I could see my old file. She was confused but agreed. I sat in silence, flipping through the yellowed pages, the warnings, the academic probation forms, the final decision letter. It felt like reading someone else's story. Before I left, I tucked a note into the file. Thank you for giving me a reason to grow up. I'm still learning. My name, lecturer, Department of Philosophy. There's still hard days. Students drop out. Essays come in late. Burnout looms. But every time I walk into that classroom and ask a new group of students, what does it mean to know something? I feel like I'm home. Not because I belong to the university now, but because I finally belong to myself. It was late spring when the invitation arrived. A cream-colored envelope, hand-addressed, slipped into my campus mailbox. At first, I thought it was a wedding invite. But when I opened it, I realized it was something entirely different. You were formally invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Conference on Rethinking Higher Education. Below that was a single line. Theme: Reimagining Failure as a Tool for Growth. I stared at the letter in disbelief. Me? A keynote speaker? At that conference? This wasn't just a local education event. This was national. People from Ivy League schools would be there. Heads of departments. Researchers. Journalists. Some of the same types who once would have used words like undisciplined and unserious to describe me. And now they wanted me to speak. My first instinct? Say no. What did I really have to say that they didn't already know? What could I, the guy who had flunked out of university, offer to a room full of academic elites? But then I thought of Mia, and others like her, and the old version of me, lost and angry, sitting in the back row with no idea how to ask for help. So I said yes. The night before the keynote, I barely slept. I kept rewriting the opening. Every version felt either too polished or too raw. Eventually, I gave up. I decided to speak the way I taught, honestly. The conference hall was packed. I stepped onto the stage. The spotlight made the room go silent. Hundreds of eyes looked up, pens ready, expectations high. I took a deep breath and began. Good morning. I'm here today, not because I succeeded, but because I failed spectacularly. I got expelled from university, from the very institution that later hired me to teach. There were a few quiet chuckles, a few surprised gasps. I was arrogant, impatient, and disillusioned with the system. But more than anything, I was terrified of being ordinary, of being wrong, of being vulnerable. I paused. The room was listening. But failure was the only teacher I actually listened to. It stripped me down, rebuilt my curiosity, and forced me to rethink what education was for. Not for grades, not for prestige, but for understanding, for growth, for connection. From there, I told my story, not as a redemption arc, but as a learning process still in motion. I spoke about students like Mia, who are smart but afraid to sound dumb. I spoke about how universities often reward performance over sincerity and how many professors forget what it means to be a beginner. And I ended with this. Maybe we need fewer perfect lecturers and more honest ones. Fewer defenders of tradition and more builders of bridges between knowledge and real life. Education isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about staying curious long enough to ask the next right question. When I finished, there was silence, then a standing ovation. That speech changed everything. An editor from a major publishing house approached me after the talk. "We loved your perspective," she said. "Have you ever considered writing a book?" I laughed. "I've considered it every night since I was 20 and angry, but I've never actually done it." "Well," she said, "maybe it's time." A year later, I submitted the manuscript. Unlearned. How failure taught me more than school ever did. The book made modest waves, enough to get some attention, enough to start conversations. But what mattered most were the letters. Dozens of them. From students, from educators, from people who dropped out, burned out, or were told they'd never amount to anything. One letter, handwritten, simply said, "Thank you. You made me feel seen." And here I am now, still teaching, still learning, still walking the same halls that once felt like a prison, now a kind of home. Every semester I remind my students, grades matter, but growth matters more. Ask better questions. Be willing to fail. And remember, even if you get expelled from one version of yourself, you can always return wiser. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I played it safe, if I kept my head down and never questioned anything. But then I wouldn't be here, not just as a teacher, but as someone who finally understands what teaching means. It means remembering what it felt like to sit in the back row and feel invisible, and never letting another student feel that way again. It's strange, the way time folds in on itself. Last week, I stood in front of the same classroom where I once refused to participate, now watching a room full of students argue passionately over whether ethics can exist without empathy. I said nothing for 10 minutes, just listened, and I realized I'd become the kind of teacher I once needed. But as the semester closed and I prepared final grades, another thought began creeping in, a quiet one, more persistent than anxiety and less dramatic than doubt. What comes next? A few months after my book was published, I was invited to consult with the university's curriculum review board. They wanted to redesign the core philosophy modules for first-year students. At first, I thought I'd just offer a few ideas. Instead, they handed me the chair position. "Lead the reform," they said. "You clearly have a vision." It felt surreal, again, but also earned. I assembled a team, young lecturers with wild ideas, older professors who remembered what teaching felt like before bureaucracy buried it. Together, we started reshaping the program, not to make it easier, but to make it more alive. We cut out jargon. We added case studies, modern dilemmas, debates, real-world scenarios. Students read Aristotle and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Plato, and pop culture critiques of capitalism. We let them build arguments about ethics in video games, artificial intelligence, political memes. It worked. Engagement went up. Dropout rates dropped. But not everyone liked the change. A few senior faculty members began pushing back. "This is too radical," one said at a closed-door meeting. "We're losing academic seriousness," another warned. "Philosophy isn't supposed to be fun," a third actually declared. I listened. I respected them. But I also challenged them. "We're not making it easier. We're making it matter." Some stayed opposed. But others, slowly, began to see the results they couldn't deny. And perhaps, deep down, they remembered their own days of youthful intellectual hunger. I wasn't trying to burn the system down. I just wanted to open a few windows. Then something unexpected happened. I was offered the role of Vice Dean of Learning Innovation. It came with influence, a budget, responsibility, less time in the classroom. I hesitated. Teaching, being with students, had saved me. It wasn't a job to me. It was a second chance. Could I really trade that for an office, spreadsheets, and meetings? That's when Mia, now a graduate student and teaching assistant, walked into my office one afternoon. I heard about the offer, she said. I nodded. She looked at me the way I once looked at my old professor, the one who gave me a second shot. If you take it, promise me one thing. What? Don't forget what it felt like to be at the bottom. I smiled. That's the only thing I'll never forget. I took the role, but I made a rule for myself. I'd always teach one class each semester. No matter how many meetings or proposals or reports landed on my desk, I would never fully step away from the place where real transformation happened, the classroom. Because titles come and go, awards gather dust, but moments of connection, those stay. It's been 10 years since the university expelled me. I've now helped build a mentoring program for at-risk students. We've launched mental health support systems that didn't exist when I was struggling. We've even introduced a course called Failing Forward, where students study the role of failure in personal and intellectual growth. And yes, my story is on the syllabus. Sometimes I walk past students who don't recognize me. That's okay. They don't need to know my past. They're busy building their futures. But once in a while, someone stops me and says, "You're the one who got expelled, right?" And I say, "Yes." Then they ask, "So, how did you come back?" And I tell them, not all returns are welcome at first. But sometimes the place that broke you is the only one that can help you rebuild, if you walk back in with open eyes and a different heart. Epilogue. One rainy afternoon, I visited the archives department. I wanted to find my original expulsion file again, out of curiosity more than nostalgia. But the receptionist shook her head. That file no longer exists. It was removed. I blinked. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "Your faculty now. That version of you is gone. We only keep the current record." I walked away with a strange mix of relief and grief. The past had been erased, not out of shame, but because it had finally been rewritten. Not forgotten. Transformed.